I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Today on Hard Knocks, I interview Timothy Egan, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, National Book Award winning author, and longtime former New York Times columnist. We discuss really a lot about journalism and about his history of covering my case, and as well as discussing issues like predatory journalism and what he calls the biggest crisis of our time, misinformation, and our inability to agree on what is true in the world and how to deal with that, how to grapple with that both individually and as a society. And then, of course, having covered a lot of stories of injustice in the world, how that writing has affected the way that Tim has come to process his own experiences of pain and struggle and injustice in his own life that might be helpful for you. So I hope you all enjoy.
So I just want to say before we go, the Hulu series was fantastic. It was
I'm so glad you liked it. Yay.
So well done. And you didn't pull any bullshit, and you didn't have to do any, it was artsy. It was real. You had just the right amount of, sort of the eternal verity in there, got beyond the immediacy of it. The ending question you asked about, what is real truth versus what is judicial truth. And I just thought you crushed it. I was really pleased.
Yay!
Really pleased.
Thank you. I'm really proud of it too. I'm hopeful that it gets the recognition that it deserves, because I think.
What's been your reaction so far?
I've gotten tons of people saying that that Grace's performance, the girl who plays me, the actress who plays me, is just like out of this world phenomenal. I've gotten mixed reviews from people who on the one side say they're like, I don't know. I mean, there's always people who want to like hate on it because they're like, it's not about Meredith Kercher, it's about you. And it's like, well, yeah. And then I think there are some people who thought that the whimsical aspects of it were discordant with the true crime nature of it. But I think that was also a very intentional choice, that like this wasn't a true crime story until it became one. Like this was just people living their lives. And then all of a sudden a tragedy occurred. So I think that I think people come with a lot of, readiness to judge this story. And I think that sort of dovetails nicely into the interview that we should get started.
Okay, sure.
So full disclosure to our audience, welcome, Tim. We've never actually really talked much, but we know of each other. You know of me quite well, because back in the day, you wrote a number of articles defending me while I was on trial, which was very unpopular at the time. And I'm curious, first of all, you're a historian, you're a journalist. What was it like for you to witness the sort of mass rush to judgment in my case?
I mean, in some cases, it was really painful because I really believe in the free press. I come from a blue-collar background, a family of 9. I mean, my brother's a dishwasher. My sister works at Walmart. And, I've got to be a New York Times reporter, win a Pulitzer Prize. And I really believe the power of the press to stick up for, to right injustices, to go after things that are wrong, to point out the court of last resort sort of thing that we do. And the rush to judgment, the sort of jackal effect that happened in your thing, was a part of the press that was really hard for me to see and accept. I mean, I was appalled. They just had blood in their teeth. And it was mainly the British tabloid press, but, a lot of Americans sort of lazily picked up on that. So part of my reason initially for writing pieces defending you was I was just so appalled at the one-sided reaction that everybody had jumped on this narrative without very much evidence to it. So, I mean, it was painful. It was painful. There also my brothers in the press. The press is going through a lot of hell right now. A newspaper closes every week. We've lost 2/3 of the journalists we had 20 years ago. It's hard for the business model to make the free press work. We're in a fucking shit pile, of misinformation right now. So we need talented reporters who believe in the truth and who try to get the truth. So it was really hard.
Yeah.
And then I just, initially I was drawn to your case because of the parallels to my own family. We love Italy. My daughter's your age. She was in Italy at the same time. And all of a sudden there was paparazzi actually outside her room, when she was a studentessa in Bologna. And they were like, oh, there's the girl from Seattle. Suddenly she got dumped on with this master narrative that, and she because my daughter spoke really good Italian, she overheard one mother of one of her fellow students saying, there's the girl from Seattle, don't go near her, they're savage. It's like they talked about her like exchange from Seattle was a horrible thing. So I saw this thing from that perspective, from a press perspective, and then was just appalled at the rush to judgment. Now, I'll tell you, and I went back and reread some of these pieces the other day in prep for this interview. I was really surprised at the reaction, which was mostly negative.
Wow.
I just pointed out that there was zero physical evidence. I just tried to go through the case as if I knew nothing. Nothing. There was zero physical evidence linking you to the crime scene, and there was zero motive. I've written 10 books, and you look, and a lot of them have a horrible thing at the core of it. And you look for two things in there: motive and evidence. And there was zero. So I just tried to write that in my piece, the first piece I wrote. And then I looked at the reaction and I was like, oh, you're just all in because she's an American girl and you can't see the crime of this thing. You went through all this too. So it really surprised me, the reaction too. And it somewhat changed, I have to say, Amanda, as a lifetime journalist, again, a lover of this trade, this beleaguered trade, it somewhat permanently changed my view of our great free press, that it has a real dark side. You felt the brunt of it, but I saw it as well.
So was this the first time that you had seen anything quite like this? Like prior to it, like it felt like, the free press was the free press and it wasn't predatory or not living up to its ideals or integrity in the way that you saw. Like, was this case like the catalyst for you?
Well, the only thing I could think is similar, and it's not a direct parallel, so let me be correct on that. I unfortunately, in my long reporting career, had to cover a number of these child shootings, when a kid is shot at school, 12 people are killed. I remember the one in Colorado was the first one in Littleton, I think it was, and there was a massacre of children, teenage kids. And, you go to these things and it's a million journalists and they're all surrounded. And my heart was broken because my own kids, you always filter these things through your own children's life. And my heart was just broken going to one of these tragedies. But then you see the mob, you see the journalistic mob, and they're just making I don't want to paint a broad brush, but a lot of them are making jokes about it. It's a story that they need to jump on and get something ahead of the other person on. And so I saw a little bit of that dark side in those things. So to answer your question, no, that wasn't the first time. But it was the first time I'd seen a complete rush to judgment that I felt was wrong. Again, not allowing for my own biases of having a kid your age and living in Seattle. I just felt it was factually wrong. And how could the rest of the press not see this?
Totally.
And then I'll tell you what was amazing. When I wrote that first column, I remember my friends, you probably weren't reading the Italian press.
No, I didn't have access to it.
Right. You had other things to do. But, La Repubblica, it was La Nazione, the big papers in Italy, they had front page stories saying, New York Times says Amanda is innocent, which in a weird way, I was sort of happy, And our own New York Times correspondent, the Rome-based correspondent, was pissed at me. Now, I was an opinion columnist at the time. I don't want everyone to understand the difference. I had left the newsroom after 25 years and we did everything good. And then I went to the opinion side, which is different. You're free to write your opinion. But the headline in La Repubblica was, Times says Amanda innocent. So I made, for you, headlines to at least a little opening in the narrative, a little crack in it.
Although it's so interesting because that's also not an accurate headline because it wasn't the New York Times saying it. It was an opinion columnist who worked at the New York Times who said it. So that's a
great point. It wasn't the institutional New York Times. It was one guy in Seattle, who works for the New York Times saying this thing, but it changed it somewhat. And I got a ton of shit. I mean, I was just amazed. I mean, my own...
From your colleagues, from your audience, like who was giving you shit?
Yeah, colleagues, and a lot of folks said you're in the tank for. Can't
what
you
does that
see
mean?
that? I wasn't seeing the master narrative of a white American privileged girl, and I said, no, she doesn't look that privileged by my thing. Your family was not born into the manor.
Right.
And they're like, you're just channeling it through your own bias. I said, no, just look at it as on the base level facts. And then the second piece that got a ton of attention was after we were waiting the verdict. This is in 2009, and the trial had been going on for many, many months. And I said, okay, let's look at the evidence so far. And I maybe I went over the deep end, but I said, this is like a Joan of Arc trial. I said, why don't they throw her in the water and see if she floats? Was one of the lines I used.
Nice.
Because they were calling you this sex-crazed devil.
Luciferina.
And I said, this is so reminiscent. I'm a student of history. This is so reminiscent of the sexual hysteria of the Salem witch trials. Joan of Arc, one of my great heroines, they just, they were using that kind of language in your trial. So I wrote this piece saying, this is not a trial. This is a 15th century witch hunt. And that pissed a lot of folks in Italy off as well. So it probably didn't help your case because they got their pride.
Yeah,
up.
I mean, that started a whole other, I'm not saying you started, but like there certainly was this thing that started happening in Italy when suddenly people in the U.S. were questioning the narrative that had been delivered by the Italian media and the Italian prosecution. The counter narrative was, oh, well, it's a conspiracy and actually, secret underground networks are working on behalf of this like murder slut. And so I think that's interesting that you had a role in that conspiracy theory.
And I want to say, I pointed out in that piece that I even said several times, I love Italy. I love its people, its culture, its traditions. But I understand when your pride is against the wall. I understand this is, people are criticizing your judicial system. I tried to put that out there and establish that, I wasn't knocking their system, but this was a farce.
Right. Yeah. I also read a few of your pieces in anticipation of this interview. And it's notable to me how often you made a point of saying this is not about our system versus their system, because our system sends people to death row. And you brought up like cases like Troy Davis to say, hey, like we do things wrong here too, but this is clearly wrong, which I thought was great because it's true that this case does really open up that Pandora's box of awareness of wrongful convictions for a lot of people that they may not have been aware of before.
No, I'm glad you pointed that out because you know better than anyone because of your work in the Innocence Project. We do some awful things in this country in the legal system. We have, just as your Hulu series showed, we have so many cases where judicial truth is different than real truth. The wrong people get put away. And I thought by establishing that, I would drop the pride barrier, or at least a little bit, so it wouldn't be us versus them. And one more point on something you raised. I had to point this out to all my Italian friends. I never talked to, if I was part of a conspiracy, I missed all the meetings. I never talked to any outside. I know there was a bunch of people, there's a judge in Seattle and some from ex-lawyers, and they're all working on your behalf. I never talked to these people. I'm an independent journalist. I did my own work. I looked at this case, and then I heard later from all these people. But I'm sorry, I don't have a badge, a card. I can't show that I belong to this conspiracy in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting that the immediate assumption was to question not your reasoning, but your motives, your objectivity. Right. Why do you think that was the case?
Again, it was because I was in the tank for you. I just stopped being, people kept saying, you're not being objective. And I thought it was the opposite of that. And I said, if you just look at this as an outsider, just pretend you've come into this case cold and didn't read any of the stories. And that's another, I do think that's a flaw with the Italian judicial system, is they let people be influenced by the outside stories. The Italians as you know, the prosecution, they leak stories to the media. They established that narrative in the press before any juror was able to hear your case bias-free. And at least we sequester jurors in our country to try to keep them from being influenced by the outside media narratives. That's not the case in Italy. So I think, everyone jumped on this bandwagon when the Italian media, and they said, and then the other thing was, and this is what people kept coming back at me for. Again, this is not about me, it's about you. I'm sorry. But
No, please. No, I'm actually
saying,
super curious about this. Like, what is it like to be a person on the ground?
It's a little, I'm a little bit on the niche on the master story. They kept saying, but she confessed. She confessed. How can you not, all your stuff, how can you not oversee the fact that she confessed? Well, we know that the, quote, confession would never survived an American trial. It would have been thrown out because you didn't have a lawyer present because you were under the 12-hour duration. Nor would it have survived the British press. As many of the Brits later pointed out, not many, but enough, that this wouldn't have, no fair trial would have allowed that confession. And that was my response to that. People said, how do you deal with this confession? And that's what people hit me on a lot, is that you're circumventing that. And I said, I just imagine my kid getting slapped around, knowing a little bit of Italian, being under sleep deprivation, which does a lot of things to people. And there's a lot of studies on that. What it just, you just mental fog. You just can't think. Yeah. So that was the obstacle, was the confession.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I'm hearing also is that just the mere fact that you're from Seattle suggested that you might not be able to be objective. Like there was some kind of like home team, like point scoring, like, oh, she's from my hometown, therefore I must agree with her or champion her for some reason. But like, it's not like everyone from Seattle was pro Amanda Knox, especially early on. Like I know that there are other Seattle-based reporters who wrote very negative articles about me, including I'm like the first one that comes to mind was Charles Mudede from The Stranger.
Yeah,
did you ever like cross paths with him or come into confrontation with him?
I mean, I try not to get into intramedia spats because I think they're meaningless to anyone except for intramedia people. I try to keep on the higher plane. Mudede came after me. He was wrong, and it was largely meaningless. But I remember him. There's a lot of people read The Stranger. It's very influential in Seattle. Now, as to the hometown bias, that's an absurd claim. If someone's from New York City and they're on trial, and the reporters from New York City, do they make the same claim about that, or LA or San Francisco? That's a really provincial thing, I think. The only thing I'll say on behalf of the Seattle thing is I understood your casual playfulness. That when you did those cartwheels and that became that, I said at one point in my piece that you were basically on trial for inappropriate behavior, not murder, but for why is she acting this way? Why is she doing cartwheels? Again, my daughter was a soccer player like you and all this. And this sort of playful goofiness that what an athlete does, I always stretch between stuff too, That was, to me, it's just very natural sort of playfulness. And I saw sort of a little bit of a Seattle thing in that, I think.
Yeah.
And honest to God, I think that's the extent of my bias of Seattle.
Fair. Just a knowledge of how goofy we all are.
Right. That we don't take things as seriously, that we're not as formal. And certainly that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And I even remember noticing little things like that when I first got there that I was like, weird. People are showing up like even just like the way that we dress is very different. Like I showed up in Perugia wearing like sweatpants and like everywhere I went, people were just like dressed very neatly with their nice Italian shoes. And I was like, whoa, why isn't everyone in their pajamas? Like I went to high school in my pajamas. Like what is going on? And that's just a cultural difference. But of course it reads
There's
differently.
A term in Italy very well called making a bella figura.
Yeah.
Which is basically how you present yourself to the world. And that's a really big deal in Italian culture. I don't think a lot of Americans understand how big of a deal that is. So you showing up in casual clothes, you're not making a bella figura. Had you been a little more glam, not glam, but a little more, dressed up to the level, maybe it would have changed the narrative. And it's funny, that shouldn't matter, should it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You once described my case as a collision of predatory journalism and slipshod prosecution. And I want to amplify this conversation outwards, because what I'm really interested in is how you think. First of all, can you, as an industry insider, describe what you mean by predatory journalism? And if you can, explain why it exists.
Yeah, there's a couple things at work here. One is and I have to separate the two. One is if you consider the tabloids. And I'm not necessarily against the tabloid press. I think it represents a lot of times the vox populi, the average folks reading a folded paper on the subway. I'm not necessarily against that. But they're very, very, very market and headline driven. The New York Times is not. The Wall Street Journal is not. CNN is not. But they're very headline and narrative driven. So Foxy Knoxy and Sexual Demon Luciferina, well, that wasn't that one, I thought. Is a fantastic way to get attention, to get eyeballs. Sex crazed girl will get you reading a lot more than Pete Hegseth, changes Pentagon policy to outlaw legitimate journalists, which he did recently, by the way. They kicked all legitimate journalists out of the Pentagon, so that only supporters of the president are following the DOD right now. So that's one thing, is that it's a market-driven, headline-driven, eyeballs on the screen, and if you got sex in there and a narrative that people can slot into, it's going to soar. It's going to take. The other thing, and this is hard to say here for some people, it's a little bit of a woke narrative that how could this privileged white girl, and this is where it affects my side of the press, New York Times, say PBS, Wall Street Journal, sort of mainstream media that really still has good reporters and values strong, investigative, truth-driven stuff. But we want to bend over backwards to make sure we're not sliding someone in an old way. So that's where, the black Rudy Goudet, who's basically was the killer, convicted of the killer, and but he's black. And if he wasn't black, that wouldn't have. If it wasn't black, it would be a completely different story, I think. So that was the second part of it. That I think the reason I had critics within my tribe, the tribe of so-called good journalists, was I wasn't going along with a woke view of this. I mean, that's probably too harsh to call it woke, but just a view where you're not considering the other side. And it's true, as you know, so many innocent blacks have always been railroaded into crimes. I'm writing a book now. It's totally got me deep into this great story about the first black graduate of West Point, a Buffalo soldier in the 1880s who goes west, and he's the only black officer in the entire American Army. And they railroad him out of the Army. They court-martial him out on a bullshit thing because he falls in love with a white woman. Now they come up with a bunch of phony things, and it's a tragedy. But it's made me look, this historical animus towards black suspects is not some made-up thing.
Right.
So I understand that. But unfortunately, it got stuck on you. So that was the collision part.
Yeah. Got it. This episode of Hard Knocks is brought to you by Hero Bread. So in our house, we go through a lot of bread because we have two small children who eat nothing but empty carbs.
And let's be real, bread is delicious. I like bread too. I like a good bagel or a breakfast burrito. But
we've been trying to sneak protein, fiber, anything into their diets. And lo and behold, we get Hero Bread reaching out to us and offering this sponsorship. So what is Hero Bread? Well, it's bread, regular sliced white bread
I think
or
you
seeded
can't
bread.
Stress this enough. It's bread. It's fluffy. It's moist.
It's
toasts. Soft. It toasts well. It does all the things you want bread to do, but it comes with lots of fiber. It's low net carb, 0 grams of sugar. One of the bagels even has 19 grams of protein.
So I would give it a try. And if you want to give it a try, you can go to hero.co, that's HERO.co, and use the code word KNOX to get 10% off at checkout.
Really, try Hero Bread. I was skeptical. This is just delicious bread. It's delicious bread, and I feel a lot better eating it just physically in my body than I would have if I had been eating, your old-fashioned empty carb bread.
Do you think that the problem of predatory journalism and misinformation, first of all, is something that is more of a tabloid problem, or is it general media problem, like just across the board?
I think it's the great, and I'm not alone in saying this, Amanda, I think it's the great crisis of our time. I really do. Going well beyond your case. I mean, to quote Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, life's little more than three people in a hill of beans. I mangled the quote, actually. But it's the great crisis of our time. How can democracies function when the people making the decisions in those democracies don't have accurate information? There is a sea of crap. I didn't used to believe this. I've come around to believe it in the last few years. You look at how many people believe things that are wrong. And we see it, right now in the way we're dealing with vaccinations, for example, where we're dealing with health issues. We certainly see it in all of our politics, where people just outright make things up, like the January 6th, that the president won the 2020 election, which no legitimate reading of the 2020 election would ever say. The press, in its failing, it's both its institutional failing and its business failing, is kind of given into that. Now, the macro force of all this right now is the Elon Musk, X-driven, throw something out there. It doesn't have to be fact-checked view of how many people get their news. And so many people get their news from that. So I really fear for us. It's not just me. A million people say this. We will have a hell of a hard time governing ourselves if we can't have some baseline of facts. Now, could we have gone to war against Hitler in the greatest fight of good against evil in the 20th century if enough people believed that Hitler wasn't so bad, the Holocaust was a lie, that Poland deserved to be invaded, that, and there's a revisionist history on this right now. I mean, Tucker Carlson said Churchill was the bad guy. I mean, if that counter-narrative had been able to enter the Western democracies, we arguably wouldn't have gone to war in World War II. So, I mean, it is a huge crisis, and I don't know where it's going to go right now because it's sloshing around. We at the New York Times could write a million things correcting the record, but the majority of voters will get their information from places that reinforce their biases. So yeah, I think the predatory journalism goes well beyond your case, certainly. Your case was just a kind of a laboratory level examination of how this can hurt one person and ruin one person's life. I mean, you've made yourself a renaissance. Thank God you didn't let it ruin you. But think of how many people are on the wrong end of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree that the inability to agree on facts and to have access to accurate fact-checked information is a huge crisis. And it leads to not just, institutional issues, but even just like civil between two people issues. Like it feels, we're not on the brink of civil war, but there certainly is this feeling of like a great divide between factions in our culture right now. And I wonder, do you see this problem of, again, predatory journalism and misinformation being a problem that's just gotten worse and worse? And if so, why?
Yeah, it has gotten worse. And the why is because it goes to the business model. You will get more eyeballs on your product if you reinforce people's bias. What you and I are doing right now is hopefully not reinforcing people's biases. We're trying to breathe a little bit. We're trying to let the room air out, let the room of information air out. We're giving alternative views. But as long as you go to places, news sources that only reinforce your bias, that helps their business model. And that's why it's getting worse. So Fox News started as a relatively balanced counter-narrative to the traditional media. Fine, that's great. But they've grown into a house organ for all of one side of the political view. And you can make the claim of some things on the left for the same thing. And they don't make money by being fair and balanced. The money is in reinforcing people's bias. And that's why it's getting worse. So we all go to our little echo chambers to hear the stuff that tells us, the stuff we want to believe. And God, that, again, that we've always had, if you watch Ken Burns' series on the American Revolution, I don't know if you did, but it's great. I worked with Ken on a documentary once. He's fantastic. He's our premier teller of our stories, of our American narratives. And there was plenty of biased journalism at the time of the American Revolution. There were, British favored sources and Patriot favored sources, and they would tell lies and slander Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. All that was going on, but it wasn't to the level. We really didn't have a balanced press until like 100 years after that, but it wasn't to the level. Right now, it's just saturation. And I'll go beyond politics. I just go into basic medical information, scientific information, climate change information. If we can't agree on I got in an minor argument with someone yesterday. I said, we're approaching the shortest day of the year. The sun's now setting at 4:18. She said, no, the sun's setting at 4:33. And I said, this is not an opinion thing. I said, the sun set, but imagine we couldn't agree on the temperature or the Mariners won yesterday. We're almost at that level,
Wild. I mean, so actually, that's a really interesting point that like during the Revolutionary War, there was also very biased journalism. And then what led it to be the entity that it became, which was an attempt at fair-minded, fact-checked journalism, and how did that slip away?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked me that because we studied this in journalism school. There was such a minor sea of crap. Now we've got a major sea of crap. There was such a minor sea of crap with all these biased newspapers, and everybody knew who was the Tory side, who was the Patriot side. The term yellow journalism came from these tabloids that were actually printed on yellow paper. And they were so bad. They were all about child crimes and spectacular slayings. People got so upset with unable to believe anything that out of this morass of crap came the Associated Press, came the New York Times, came a few things that people making decisions, financial people, political people, science people, teachers, needed a source that was accurate. So again, there was a business need for that. And that happened in the mid-19th century. And it flourished all the way through until about 10 years ago. So we actually got out of the biased news era, and part of it, and I'm torn by this, Amanda. Part of it is because we allowed more voices into the conversation, okay? There used to be these gatekeepers. You can't get in the New York Times, you can't get on CBS News until you go through the gatekeeper. Now, you and I could reach millions of people just by talking,
yes,
which I'm in favor of. But the downside of that is there's no gatekeepers of truth on that. So it leaves it up to the audience to decide, well, what's truth or not? So we did have a long period where we changed the model of news gathering. Again, it was the dawn of the Associated Press and the fair and balanced, and at least there was an agreed upon set of facts. The sun rose at 7:18 yesterday. The Mariners lost 0-4, and President so-and-so issued this decree. We could agree on these simple facts, and beyond that too. Nazi Germany is a threat. Cholera is something that can be eliminated by cleaning up water. Those sorts of things.
Right.
So we're going to have a counter reaction to that again, is what I think. If you follow to your original question, if you follow where the model went, something will emerge out of the sea of crap. People will return again because they need accurate information.
Yeah, I was about to say, it seems that there is that tension. On the one hand, it's very satisfying to have our preconceived notions reaffirmed by professional writers and opinion people and commentators. And on the other hand, we do want to have accurate information in order to very effectively navigate the world. And so there's that tension on the part of the audience, of the consumers of the media,
Right.
Is that what is that how you go about telling the truth even when no one wants to hear it? Or like, how do you do that?
You know, I'm torn on this. I'm being very honest with you. I used to believe, there's always been this school of thought. It goes back to Milton 300-400 years ago, that the more voices, the better. That from the babel will emerge the truth. And I'm not sure I believe that anymore. That the people always used to say in my business that sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Right.
That the more sunshine you have, people can see the truth. And we have a lot of sunshine. We have a lot of voices. We have a lot of voices, but I'm not sure what emerges from that is the truth. That was for about 200-300 years, that was the conventional wisdom on free speech itself. Now, I don't want there to be restrictions on free speech from the left or the right. I was appalled when they went after Jimmy Kimmel. You know, when did we start censoring comedians in this country? Right. My God, we used to make fun of the Soviet Union and everyone else forever, or Egypt or any of these places that dared to put a comedian in jail. We did that. We nearly drove Jimmy Kimmel off the air. That was after censoring voices on the other side of the thing. I don't want that to become a thing. But we have to have some sort of corrective from the sea of information we have right now.
Yeah, is it just a matter of scale? Like 300 years ago, there just wasn't that many voices being published, and now we're just inundated with voices being published, and there's no like. How did people figure out what was accurate or inaccurate at the 300 years ago?
Well, this is one of the problems. This is one of the things that sort of bothers me, and people give me shit for this too. But professional journalists adhere to a set of try to adhere to fact-checking norms. You don't put something on the air. You don't put something in a newspaper. You don't air it online if it can't be verifiably true. Now, the counter to that is, well, you can sue someone for libel. Well, as you know, libel is a really hard thing to do, especially if you're a public figure. I'm in favor of that, by the way, because I don't want, presidents and senators suing me because I dare criticize them for their public actions.
Right.
So I don't know. But here's what I think is going to happen. Something, and I'm not rooting for this. I want everyone to understand I'm not rooting for this. Tim, not rooting for this. I'm afraid this is what's going to happen. On the medical front, we'll have some major outbreak of something. There's a little measles epidemic now. Who knows where it's going to go? But some of the diseases we basically did eliminate, like polio, those things. We're going to have something that kills children because we'd gotten rid of it, but we no longer vaccine. And then people will say, well, how did this happen? And the big reason why it happened is because we didn't listen to the truth anymore. We let everyone be a doctor. Dr. Google is more important than your own physician. So it's unfortunately going to take something, again, not rooting for this. It's going to take something catastrophic with real tragedy to get people to look at what's the core of this? Where did this come from? And the part of the blame will certainly be, if not all the blame, when we let ourselves get won over to misinformation.
So why wasn't the pandemic that moment for us?
Yeah, it's interesting because the pandemic was the break moment. Rather than being the thing, if you look at our history, that's a really great question. The pandemic actually caused all the schisms. That's when people started distrusting the medical industrial complex. And there's a lot to mistrust there, don't get me wrong. But that's what caused the break. Dr. Fauci, people say, well, let's hang Dr. Fauci. I mean, he was just a lifetime government employee who'd been through all these pandemics before and warned us about it. But suddenly people were like, he was the bad guy. I think that had less to do with the information and more to do with the reaction to the information. And I'm in the middle on this too. A lot of school children lost a year or two in school and never recovered. Mm-hmm. And we now know that probably was an overreaction. Kids, most of them didn't get COVID, but why do we shut down the whole school system? So that's what happened with that. COVID, you're absolutely right. That's a great point. When people look at our era and study it, that'll be one of the hinges. That'll be one of the pivot points of mistrust. Unfortunately, it just feeds the misinformation law. And, go a day trying to read any medical information and try to figure out what's truthful. And you're just, you're in seaweed.
Yeah. I mean, once trust has been lost, how does an institution get it back?
God, you're asking great questions that I'm not always prepared to ask, but you're asking great questions. So let's look at what's happened on the trust. Trust in all institutions has just precipitously declined. So I wrote a book about going on a pilgrimage from Canterbury to Rome, which this was a few years ago. I basically walked all the way to Rome on an ancient pilgrimage trail called the Via Francigena. And it was delightful, but I was trying to examine my own faith and I'm a lapsed Catholic, which is the largest growing segment in the religion in American society, they say. Lapsed. We keep it culturally, but we're not. And I started looking at religion. And that was my whole purpose of that pilgrimage, was to, we sort of float along spiritually. We don't really pay attention to it's this or that. And I thought, after my mother died, and she was a very spiritual person, I said, I really owe responsibility to her to look at my spiritual side, to look at what's really there, to ask these questions. If I can't answer them, at least ask them again. Why are we here? What's God's relationship to us? What does the entirety of Christianity teach us about humans and how we interact? So you ask those things when you go on a pilgrimage. It's called deep walking. It's a really cool thing. I recommend it to anyone, and beautiful too. But while I did that, my faith in organized religion dropped. I mean, it was already pretty low.
I love that.
I looked at all the history. I was like, wow, more people died in Europe. This has the added value of being true. More people died in Europe than died in World War II in wars of religion. That was called the Wars of Religion. And they were Christian versus Christian, Protestants versus Catholics. 30 million people died in this 100-year period in the 15th and 16th century, right after the Reformation. And it was basically two different interpretations of the Prince of Peace. And holy cow, 30 million people died over different interpretations of this. And so faith in the institution of religion has seriously declined. But then you look at the other ones. They've all fallen down. The press, law, the judicial system, the medical industrial complex, big pharma, all of them. I mean, people have very little faith in our institutions. And each of them
Is that deserved?
I'm sorry?
Is that deserved? Or like...
In some cases it is. So I'll tell you what I said in my pilgrimage book was one of my many siblings, was a victim of sexual abuse by a priest. And it crushed him, absolutely. And his best friend, who was also a victim, threw himself in front of a train. And it just ruined my brother. He said, I'll never go into a church again. I'll never believe a thing they say. That's deserved, to your question. And the reason why that's deserved is because they betrayed him. They betrayed him. And on that sexual abuse scandal, which has been going on for 40, 50 years, they did a lot of betrayals. That was deserved. What's happening in the press is that some of it is much deserved. But when people say on those polls, I don't trust the press, they're thinking of everything from the New York Times to Breitbart. Everything from Turning Point USA's productions to The Economist. The press is lumped in with anyone who has a voice in there. So I don't think it's necessarily people distrust the mainstream press that much, although it has gone down as much as they lump the whole press in that.
Well, and you also mentioned that one of the ways that there is an expression of, if not distrust, then undervaluing, is that people don't go to newspapers for the news anymore like they used to. They go to opinion places like X or Facebook to gather their information and to gather the narrative around that information or misinformation. Why? Why is that?
Well, to your point, this is amazing. I only discovered this when I went over from the news side, where we would spend months and months and months. We won our Pulitzer doing a series called How Race is Lived in America. And the job was to just go as deep below the surface as you can, to not just look at it in a superficial way. So I spent a lot of time with an African-American politician in Seattle, Norm Rice, first black mayor of Seattle, and the first Chinese-American governor, Gary Locke, to try to really go below the surface. And it's interesting because they said, I don't walk into a room without someone looking at race. And I know I can't see that. So we tried to go really deep. Then I go to the opinion side, and your stories are 10 times more read than the news side. The pieces I wrote about you were always the most read things in the New York Times. And on any given day, there's so many things going on in the world, I'm sorry, that are more important than one woman's travails.
Agreed.
Right? Thank you.
Yeah.
And yet my editors were just shocked. They're going, this is the most read thing in the New York Times. And it was like for a week, it was the most read thing on one of the two main pieces I wrote in the middle of that. So that goes to what I said earlier. Things that get eyeballs are, what you're then drawn to. So that, we labor on the news side trying to get the thing right. And enough people read it, but then you throw out some opinion, some hot take, and it gets a huge audience. And I think that's just the way human beings are. I don't think that's an institutional failure.
Okay. So,
and I'm sorry to say you were the most read thing, and that you were more important than Chechnya or invasion of a country or anything like that. It's horrible. It's misplaced. I'll say, yeah.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to sort of wrap my mind around is, are we in trouble? Like you talk about how this is the biggest crisis of our time, and so what do we do about it? And you have a ton of experience seeing how people respond to one form of reporting versus another, one kind of opinion versus another, and if that's just all baked into human nature, like how do we get back to a place of really caring about what is actually true and coming into an agreement about what facts are?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. It's a big topic of discussion among people who care about this issue and care about our democracy, our fragile, almost broken, hanging by a string democracy. And here's one of my solutions. This is going to sound probably kind of Mayberry-esque, but I don't give a fuck. We have to teach basic American civics. You shouldn't be able to get out of high school until you know how to operate the owner's manual of democracy. Now, I stole that line from Ken Burns, so I'll be honest with you. I try to be honest when I steal a line. That's what civics is. If you have the owner's manual of democracy, and part of the owner's manual of democracy is media literacy. You probably studied French, maybe a little Spanish in high school.
Japanese, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, you were ahead of me, certainly. My Jesuit school, it was Latin, French, Spanish. And why not have a class, a lot of them do now, in media literacy, so you can tell bullshit from truth. At least be able to tell where it's coming from so you can read its bias. That's one answer. Do not let a kid graduate from high school until they have, some knowledge of media literacy, which is a lot, again, a full year of a class in that, because it's so important to us, to how, not just to the democracy, to how we live, how we process all information, and basic civics. So you understand when your leaders are breaking the Constitution, which I'm sorry to say, many of them are doing now. So if those two things, to get to your question, Amanda, my solution is start at that level. Give kids 16, 17, 18 years old that owner's manual, or make them be able to have to pass that owner's manual. And I think that goes a long way. I've seen a lot of these. I've talked to a lot of kids in college and high school, and their media literacy class changed their view of it. They didn't understand the forces behind it, and now they understand why what they read or hear is crap so much.
Yeah, I've heard that the new term for that is AI, by the way. Have you heard that?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so apparently the new lingo is people will say that's AI, and what they mean by that is that's fake news. That's fake.
Yeah.
It's the new
right.
AI is the new word for fake. And
Right.
which I think is fascinating.
Well,
Considering
AI is
that,
the big monster that drives misinformation too. You can gear up AI as Musk has done with his version of ChatGPT, so it only spews out one side, and that's a big monster tromping along the media landscape.
yeah. One more sort of like broadening question. You've written extensively about injustice, anything from like the Great Famine to the KKK here at home. What have you learned about what happens when powerful entities get things wrong, and as a result, like individual people are the ones who bear the consequences?
Yeah. Again, I've thought about that a lot too, and that's what attracts me to certain stories. The book I'm writing now about the first black graduate of the Buffalo Soldiers is in that very vein. And this is my answer. We historians and we newspaper people write a lot about the big men of history, the Franklin Roosevelts who changed things, and that's good. I'm more and more and more attracted to those on the margins who change history. Those people who often get written out of the story. Now, in the Klan book, which I'm so happy found a huge audience. I didn't think people would want to read this dark story, and it's been a New York Times bestseller for a long time. The Ku Klux Klan 100 years ago this year had 6 million members.
God,
and
that's insane.
2 United States senators and 3 governors, including the governor of the state of Oregon, and 75 members of Congress, and 6 million people, including a children's brigade. These people put their hand on a Bible and swore to forever uphold white supremacy. They were against Jews, blacks, Catholics, and socially liberated women, like my granny, who was a flapper in the 1920s. It was on the verge of taking over the White House. What happened? All the institutions failed. The judiciary, the press, a lot of reporters were Klansmen, a lot of judges were Klansmen, a lot of cops were Klansmen. Again, putting on this hood to be anonymous and swearing to the oldest terrorist group this nation has. And one woman, she gave her life. That's a story I wrote. She decided to speak out after he'd assaulted her, this monster Klansman, and brought this guy down. And it's buttressed my faith in how lone individuals, seemingly at the margins, can bend time, can bend history. And again, the book I'm writing now is about that. The famine story, I'm an Irish American. I did not know how much it was a British, they didn't have this term at the time, but they call it now. It was clearly genocide. They said there were too many people. We got to get rid of 2 million of them. So, Ireland had tons of food. It wasn't just the potato failure, but they were exporting oats and wheat and cattle and pigs and all that to Britain, while 2 million people either died of starvation or moved out of Ireland. And that was a planned thing. And 1 or 2 people did make a difference in that case as well. So I become more and more, this is my, bringing it full circle to my positive, your daily struggle with optimism and pessimism.
Yeah.
My optimism struggle side is that God, time and again, a seemingly powerless person makes a huge difference. And that certainly was the case of this woman, Madge Oberholzer, in the Ku Klux Klan case. I mean, American history would be radically different had she not brought them down tragically. I mean, she died for it. He sexually assaulted her and she died, but she left these words beyond the grave that were read in a court that brought this man down, the Grand Dragon who controlled all of the Midwestern Klan. So I'm somewhat encouraged that in our darkest hours, rare individuals will stand up, and those people are often powerless, and they make a difference.
So where does, if they're often powerless, where does that power come from? Like, what is there? Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I jumped on your thing. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm just talking out loud as I'm thinking through what you're telling me. But like, what is a common thread or quality about people who find themselves in these crucial positions?
guts, courage, balls, doing something that's very hard to do. In the case of this woman in the Klan, so this Grand Dragon had sexually assaulted, raped several women, and they were too afraid to ever call the authorities because the authorities were often Klan members themselves.
Right.
And he said, this guy, D.C. Stevenson, said, I am the law. I am the law. So they were all afraid until this one woman decided somebody has to do something. So the variable there is courage. The variable there is just having guts to do something that's very hard to do.
Has writing about injustice and people in these positions affected the way that you process things that happen in your own life?
Yeah, it really has. And I got this from my mother, a love of history and love of the written word. And it's allowed me to live more through harder times because I see the arc of things. I really see it in the bigger picture. I try not to live in the immediacy of 10 seconds or 24 hours. I try to see myself sort of floating along the cosmos a little more, which sounds a little spacey, I know. But
hey, we're here in Seattle. We
right,
float along
exactly.
with the universe.
I'm just shuffling my place in the universe and imagining myself 100 years ago or 100. I mean, who knows if I'm another person. But Ken Burns often quotes this line, and I agree with it. That's really important for most people to understand. History does not repeat itself. You've probably heard this, but it rhymes. And so I really see these echoes of the past. In your case, so I've read a bunch of books about probably the most famous woman for 300 years, that being the teenage mystic Joan of Arc. And as you know, they ended up just basically, they called her a witch and killed her after she, a series of things, but she was truly a mystic and she truly saw beyond her time. And why does her story continue to have power? Because again, like Madge Overholser, she had the guts and courage to stand alone against the machine, seemingly powerless herself. So my love of history, my always living with it, has allowed me to get through this, to see it more, to see things more on an even keel, to say, here comes the rhyme of history again. So hatred is a good example. The first ethnic group we Americans hated were the Irish. And there was a party called the Know Nothing Party in the 1850s. They were the second biggest political party in the United States. And you know what their platform was? Keep the goddamn Irish from becoming citizens. And so you see this thing go through. I tell my fellow Irish Americans, remember where we came from. You may think we're on top now. And the majority of the Supreme Court is Catholic right now. But 100 years ago, the Catholics were in the eye of the Ku Klux Klan. They were the bad guys. They all belonged to the Pope. So allowing me to see this arc of things, I think is just, it's how I get through the day.
Does it make you feel more optimistic and peaceful that things will find a resolution? Or how does seeing the arc and seeing the rhymes of history get you to that place of being able to get through your day?
No, it often doesn't, because
more like it's gonna get worse.
Right,
buckle in,
because
buckaroo.
We're gonna go through, if it rhymes, we're gonna have to go through the shit to get. Now there's this great line.
So do you have a bunker? What's your strategy?
There's this great line that Barack Obama used to always quote, and he was quoting Martin Luther King, who was actually quoting a 17th century Asian poet, which is, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And I do believe that, but in the bending, there's a lot of bumps on the way. So I again, studying the Irish experience and how they hated it, then I see, oh, wow, we really hated Jews in the 1920s. My wife is Jewish, and her family fled a pogrom, of people basically driving them with stakes out of their village in what is now Eastern Europe. That's why we have so many Jewish people in our country, as they came in the 1920s. But they hated them more than they hated the Irish. And we passed something called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is the first time in our history we had an immigration act based entirely on race. So, seeing these arcs, you see the little vein of hatred. There it comes again. Here it comes again. 2 days ago, the president said the Somalians are garbage. They're garbage. And I saw a quote from a woman yesterday who's a Trump supporter, and she's Somalian, and she said, "My children are garbage." And I just hear those echoes. The Irish were garbage, the Jews were garbage. So that, in some way, here it comes. I can see it. It's coming again.
Yeah.
But also, I know we'll get out of it. There's a way out.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tim. This has been very enlightening, and I really appreciate your time.
It's an honor.
Yeah. Is there any way that the audience can follow you, see what you're doing?
Yeah. TimothyEganBooks.com is where I have all my stuff. So
okay. Great.
I appreciate that people love history and what you're doing, and congrats again on the series. It was wonderful.
Thank you.